All right, everybody, welcome back to Laravel Podcast Season 7. I'm your host, Matt Stauffer, CEO of Titan, and this season I'll be joined every episode by a member of the Laravel team. Today I'm talking to Joe Dixon, engineering team lead at Laravel. Joe, can you say hi, share a little bit about what you do at Laravel day to day?
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so my name is Joe Dixon, and I am the engineering team lead for Laravel Cloud. And my days at Laravel are kind of forever changing, I guess I would say. Like particularly in the last year or so, it's been a wild ride because we obviously kicked off. We broke ground on cloud back in March of 2024, so not much over a year ago. And it was a very small team. So to begin with, it was just kind of myself and Nuno and Chris Fidao, who joined the team very early on, and Mohammed at the time was working on cloud. And so that was very I was very hands-on. I was very much in the code. I was very much kind of helping set some of the direction of which way we were going to take the project. And then over the course of that year and a bit now, I was just counting up just before we came on the call. We're now up to the team is around about 18, just about to be 18 people. We're at 14 right now, but we're approaching 18. So We've grown from a very, very small team who were, kind of trying to move really, really quickly to getting Laravel Cloud out and launched to the world. And now, my job role has changed significantly, as I'm sure you can probably imagine in that time.
Wow. Well, I want to ask you a million questions about that, but I'm always supposed to start kind of a little earlier back. So I'm going to go a little earlier back.
Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit there.
No. That's exactly what I wanted. But I want to dive there, and we got to go back. So Prior to working full-time with Laravel, what were you doing? And then what did it look like for you to kind of go through that process of like going from not working in Laravel? Because everyone's kind of got a different story of what that went like. So what were you doing before, and kind of what got you into the space where you were being considered? And then what was the story of coming to work at Laravel?
Okay. I'm not sure how far back to go, but I'll go relatively far back. So I went to university relatively late. I think I started when I was 21 because I at the time didn't really know what I wanted to do. Yeah. And I had a lecturer there who I got on really, really well with, and he was the guy that happened to teach PHP.
Okay.
And so I graduated from there and wasn't sure what my role was going to be after that. And he got me in touch with a company who basically were doing what was called, in the UK, it's called a KTP, which is a knowledge transfer partnership. And it's basically a collaboration between a graduate and a company and an academic institution. So in this case, the university that I went to. And I kind of went in there very fresh. And the opportunity for me was to basically rebuild all of their kind of web-facing properties.
Okay.
And the technology we decided to use that at the time was Expression Engine. I don't know if, Matt, if you were in the Expression Engine world at any point.
Yeah. 100%. That's how I got into CI and Coding Night in the first place. So,
Gotcha. So I was attending lots of Expression Engine based conferences because this KTP came with a budget for training. Yeah. And so I was using it and trying to absorb as much information as I could. And I happened to be at one talk at an Expression Engine conference where there was a guy, his name, I think is Joel Bradbury. I've given him a shout out once on Twitter before, but I owe a lot to this guy because he gave a talk that wasn't even Expression Engine focused. From my memory, he was building a Frankenstein app between a WordPress backend or kind of a WordPress backend. And he was writing some Laravel on top of it. And that was the first time I'd ever heard the phrase Laravel, and he was kind of really singing its praises. So I went away from there and kind of tried it out, and then I was hooked from there ever since. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, I forget which year that was now, but that was probably version 4.2, maybe 4.1, 4.2. And I went back and managed to persuade that company to Expression Engine was completely the wrong choice for what we needed to build at the time. So I with a bit more experience under my belt, still not a huge amount, I kind of went back and persuaded them to rewrite everything in Laravel. And we had a really good experience doing that. And I stayed there for another few years before having the opportunity to go and work on a startup. So it was just me and two other people. I did that for 6 years, and the entire tech stack that we used there was also Laravel through that whole time.
Very cool.
So that's kind of the backstory of how I got into Laravel and kind of, how much I was using it through those years.
Yeah.
And then much like I was listening to Jess's interview, and much like Jess, she said she responded to a tweet from Taylor. I didn't quite have the elaborate pitch that Jess and Tim put together.
Did anybody have that?
I don't think so. That was pretty creative. But what I did do, and I've never talked to Taylor about this to know if it had any impact, but I remember like having a very conversation with my wife about whether I should do this or not. Like I wanted to have a way to kind of stand out when I sent the email across. And so I titled the subject of the email I made "Here Be Dragons" as a kind of in-joke to just kind of like make that email stand out. And I have no idea if it had any bearing on what was to come. But I was much like Jess and thought I've got no chance of getting this role, but I kind of owe it to myself. I just want to throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. And then after some back and forth with Taylor, it happened. So that was coming up on 3 years now that I've been at Laravel. And honestly, it's still like a dream come true every day. I still have to pinch myself that this is actually happening.
That's so great. And it's so funny because I talked to people like you and Jess, and I was like, oh, well, I knew you guys were going to get that job. And, you know, sometimes Taylor would talk to me and say, like, what do you think about this person? But most of the time he wouldn't. He would already be able to assess it out on his own. Like, he's very capable of assessing people's abilities. But then I would like learn that one of y'all got the job, and I'm like, of course that person got the job. But y'all are like, I wasn't sure if I was going to get it. I was like, you could have just asked me because I knew you were going to get the freaking job. So anyway, well deserved. So when you first got started at Laravel, what were you working on?
I went straight in on Vapor. So I was working a lot with Nuno on Vapor. It was the two of us working on that. And I did that ever up until the start of the cloud project, I guess. So that was getting on for 2 years at the time that I'd been working on Vapor, which I loved. Like Vapor was a huge silver bullet for me in my previous role because we didn't have budget for DevOps role or anything like that. So it was all basically me trying to kind of wrangle these servers together. And I know like Vapor for us was just the perfect fit. It was just the right time for us to be moving to a technology like that, and it just solved so many problems. And I never had to kind of think about it at weekends anymore. You know, if the server was going to fall over, I didn't have to worry about that. It was just bulletproof for us.
That's amazing. That story right there definitely shows a little bit of why you were so effective in working in cloud, because I'm like, that's literally the pitch for cloud. So I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, it's definitely scratching my own itch again. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I also, I guess, around about a year in, I know Taylor had wanted to work on a WebSockets package for Laravel. And we used to do internal pitches for projects that we wanted to work on. So I had an idea that I wanted to tackle that one and put the pitch in, and that became what was Laravel Reverb. So it's kind of, mostly responsible for that as well, I guess.
I was just going to ask where Reverb fit into all of that. If somebody is not familiar with Reverb, you know, I try to make sure that, you know, we don't spend too much time introducing basics. But like if somebody's never heard of Reverb before, can you give us just the quick pitch for what it is and how it's different and similar to anything that came before?
Yeah, so I think... So basically what Reverb does is allows you to add real-time connectivity to your Laravel application. So rather than having to wait for a round-hop trip back and forth through the server by doing something like polling, if you want, you know, if you have, let's think of a good example, like a news ticker on the screen, and that news ticker needs to update in real time. There's broadly a few approaches that you can take, one of which you might reach for is something like short polling, where you're continually polling the server for updates to that state that you then re-render on the page. So Reverb is a WebSocket implementation. And what WebSockets do is allow you to create one connection to the server, and then you can basically pipe information back and forth through that pipe between the client and server in real time without having to go through an HTTP handshake every time. And so it just makes that those updates really snappy and kind of instantaneous. It's not the right solution for everything, but there's, you know, in all of the apps at Laravel, so Forge and Vapor and Envoy and now Cloud. Don't know about Nightwatch yet, but I'm sure they're doing some real-time stuff in there. I just don't know if it uses Reverb. But everything. So anytime you hit a deployment on your application, every update that you see on the screen there is happening via a WebSocket connection, which is all powered by Reverb.
That's great. That's very cool. And in the earliest days, there were, you know, like when I wrote my book, we were using third-party services for the vast majority of WebSocket stuff. And then I remember Terry Laverdure put together a wrapper around, I think it was a wrapper around a node service that was like Laravel WebSocket server. And just that blew my mind. I was like, you mean we can host our own WebSocket servers, like ourselves? And it wasn't written in PHP. It wasn't a Laravel product. It was just the fact that he was able to show me how to do it like myself. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so when I heard about Reverb, I was like, you are freaking that sounds like black magic to me. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like something we can actually do. So I'm very grateful for Reverb, not just because of how easy it makes things, but just to show. I think Reverb was the first kind of like, oh, we can do things in PHP that I'm not used to thinking that are viable for us to do.
Yeah.
And one of the questions actually that came from Titan was, did you have a lot of experience working with tools like React PHP and the other kind of underlying architectures prior to Reverb? So you just kind of learned it on the job.
Yeah, my experience with WebSockets was basically adding a pusher API key to my config file.
Okay.
And everything magically happened. Yeah. So I channeled my inner Aaron Francis, and I printed off the whole spec for WebSockets spec and read that cover to cover, which was, equal parts enlightening and boring at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I hadn't played with React PHP at all, but there was another community package from the Beyond Code team that had already kind of tackled the WebSockets problem. So I was able to learn a lot from that. I was able to, sift through the documentation for React PHP and came together pretty quickly. But it is a big mindset shift writing asynchronous PHP. It's a very different beast to tackle. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the Beyond Code. I meant to mention that when I talked about Terry's, but Terry's was the first one that I saw. But yeah, Beyond Code also definitely did one of the early ones. Okay, so let's talk about. Is there anything you wanted to get into before I start diving into cloud? Because I know that cloud is not like the only thing you've done in your career. Are there any topics on mind other than cloud of your time together? Actually, let's talk about Vapor for just a second, because I think that because cloud is so new and exciting. The people who use Vapor freaking love Vapor. Like, it is not going away. Same with Forge. People use Forge, freaking love Forge. As you were working on the Vapor team, were you there at the beginning, or did you step into an already functioning, saleable product?
Yeah, it's already functioning. So I think I joined in 2022. Mm-hmm. That's right. So coming up 3 years now. And I think Vapor was launched Laracon US in 2019. So it's kind of 3 years old at the point I joined.
It was mature.
It was mature.
So what did you learn? What was new for you working with Vapor? Because just because it was mature does not mean it was a tech stack that everybody knows.
I knew, because I've been using Vapor in a previous role, I knew what Vapor was and how it worked and the problems that it could solve. So I think that kind of gave me a leg up when I came in, and I kind of knew what was happening within AWS behind the scenes.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm sure probably isn't news to anybody, but it was so nice to come into Laravel and just read the code base, and I could immediately start working on it, and there was just no, there was no learning curve to it at all. It was just as you would expect a Laravel application to be. And so getting up and running was pretty easy. In terms of what I learned, I guess there was some, I don't remember specifics, but I guess there would have been some kind of design patterns in there that I hadn't used before, which was super interesting. And I think, some of those patterns have probably made their way through into cloud as well, because Nuno and I both worked on Vapor, and we kind of laid the foundations for cloud in that respect. And I guess there was because there's loads of different configuration options within Vapor, and I was using in my previous role a very specific set of those configuration options. So I guess there was a whole part of Vapor that I didn't have so much knowledge of, and so because we were doing kind of support at the same time, so I was having to take support questions in from people and then try and figure out what they were doing. Yeah, exactly. So there was an element of that and finding my feet at the beginning, but the team here are fantastic, and having Nuno there to kind of help me and guide me through those early days was invaluable.
Oh, that's awesome. Every time I've had to deal with AWS APIs, it has made me want to jump off a cliff. Was it well established enough that the core work on AWS, was it established enough that you didn't have to kind of really be struggling, or did you also have to print out the documentation for AWS, in order to do the work you're doing there?
I don't think there's enough printer paper in the world to print out the AWS docs.
Yep. Yeah.
It was pretty well established, but they're always throwing curveballs at you. I remember the we obviously Vapor has RDS as a database backing or database offering that you can just provision RDS instances, and part of that there's a certificate handshake between the two. And I remember the certificates that we had in the Vapor code base were going to expire. And all of a sudden, customers were getting emails to say, your certificate isn't going to work, your certificate isn't going to work. And so, to figure out how to do that and not force downtime on people was like incredibly challenging. And I remember that was a deep rabbit hole into the docs and the kind of blog posts and all of the information that AWS put out in all the various different places they like to put it was pretty challenging.
I can imagine, because I've had to do really rudimentary stuff like that when we were like, oh gosh, the valet certificates originally expired after 2 years, and now people are 2 years into their valet timeline. And I was like, now what? But that was like individual people's individual machines, and it's like a developer machine. So you have some downtime, or you have to run a command. It's like no big deal. But y'all like, and that's such an interesting thing that y'all have, is that you're building developer tooling, but it is developer tooling that developers are using to provide expected, perfect uptime or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there is a level of expectation for client happiness that, of course, most of us have for our end customers. But when we're building tools for developers, it's usually more like, oh, it's open source. People will be understanding and people will be flexible. So y'all are building tools for developers that are customers. And I just think like that's such like an interesting, like, nah, you gotta, you can't just tell them, oh, you all got to SSH in and run this command or whatever. Like, no, you got to handle it. So.
Yeah, no, it's good fun. It was like there was an element of solving the problem, how we were going to roll it out, plus how we were going to communicate that with customers and try and do that with enough lead time that customers would then be able to do it and not, have it, appear on them unexpectedly. So I think we did a pretty good job of that in the end. But that was a good one. And I remember another very specific one was we'd just get the odd bug report where customers would deploy their application and their app would then serve some cached assets because it uses CloudFront behind the scenes to serve those static assets. And like, it was so intermittent. It was one of those really intermittent ones. It was just like impossible to track down. Yeah. And then again, I think one day was like, I'm just going to solve this problem, and just went deep into the docs again and managed to find some very obscure setting that we were able to change. And that whole problem just went away, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, it is nice.
So yeah. People who tell you to read the docs, they're not lying. Like it is a superpower to do that.
Yeah. It's very interesting for me because in order to, keep up my blog originally, I would read all the Laravel source code and docs. And then in order to write my book, I thought I'd read everything in Laravel. And then I wrote my book and I was like, I know like a third of this code base. And so I really I read every line of code, across multiple versions, stuff like that. And I was like, oh, wow. I thought I was a docs reader. I thought I was a source code reader until, and I had read through the entire docs multiple times, but reading the source code was a thing. And now as a CEO, I don't have time to like really have my fingers in every single piece. So I'm still very good at what I know. But when there are new things, I get okay at those. I'm not very good at those. And thankfully, there's tons of people at Titan that are very good at those. But it is just crazy to me how I'm like, I became an expert in Laravel and I've got hundreds and thousands of code bases, stuff like that. And yet, if there's a new thing where I have not read through all the docs and I have not read through the source code, I can be just as brain dead about the thing as somebody else. And granted, I can benefit from, it works like this other tool I've used or whatever. But like, each new thing is its own beast. And again, AWS is just like, AWS is next level beasting. So I do not envy you for now being on at least project 2, maybe more, where you're living in AWS day to day. So let's do that transition to cloud.
Before we do that, Matt, you just mentioned your book, and I had to tell you, I fell hook, line, and sinker for your April Fool's joke.
Oh no!
I was like, what's he doing?
Oh, no. For those who don't know, I posted an April Fool's joke that and it wasn't my idea, actually. A guy at Titan, John Bonacorsi, was like, he I think in October or September, he was like, Matt, I know that you're not an April Fool's guy, but like I just had this idea that you take your book and you announce an audiobook version, and the audiobook samples you just reading, colon, comma, space, PHP, space, function. And I was like, I got to do it. So we set a reminder in Titan Slack. I put the thing out. And what I realized is one of the reasons that I am not an April Fool's person is because I felt so awful about every person who told me they believed it. And several of them were like, I got really excited. And I'm like, I'm the worst person ever. So I'm sorry, but also I'm glad you're laughing about it.
That's good.
So.
I laughed at the end,
yeah. Good. Okay. So let's talk about cloud. What was the transition to, what was the process like of you kind of transitioning from Vapor to cloud? And when you got started on cloud, what was your I figure out the word that they use, but like they're like, here are your operating directions. Here's your marching orders. What were your marching orders on day one of being assigned to the cloud team? And were you the lead at the beginning, or were you just one of the devs at the beginning and you kind of moved into lead as the team got bigger?
Yeah, we just put like a small little skunkworks together to begin with, I guess, to just kind of try and prove some concepts.
Yeah.
The transition from Vapor to cloud was challenging in some ways because it was like context shifting a little bit. I wasn't like actively doing development on Vapor, but it was more about making sure customers were supported. So
yeah,
bug fixes if they came up, or even just being in customer support and asking questions, and then trying to get ahead into like a brand new project was pretty challenging to begin with. But we navigated that pretty quickly. We had new support people that came on and kind of took some of that responsibility. So that was great. And I think I mentioned it was at the very beginning, it was, so Chris Vidal came on to join the team. And then it was me and it was Nuno. We were kind of the first three that started work on the project together. And for us, like, we split the project into three key components, which we thought would be three key components. And to be fair, that has pretty much remained true the whole way through. So one that Chris tackled predominantly was that how we would actually run customers' compute, how we would run their workloads and what that would be on. And we went through several iterations. I've got like Telegram messages from me and Chris talking about it. And at the very beginning, we thought we would be using Lambda to do it. So basically taking what we learned from Vapor and trying to do that at scale. But for various reasons, we decided that probably wasn't the best approach to take. And so then we ended up going in the kind of direction of Kubernetes, where we've stayed and continued. So that was one side of things. There would obviously be the web app side of things that we would need. So an app that would basically customers can log into a UI so that they can click around and build their applications and configure their applications and then finally deploy their applications. It was quite hard to get meaningful movement on that at the beginning because there were so many unknowns about, even what the data model would look like. So we tried to pick off some low-hanging fruit around, well, we're going to need users and we're going to need teams of some description. I mean, even some of those things we got wrong from the very beginning. But that was something that was a work stream that we got underway with. And then the final part was the build service. So I mentioned from the UI, the customer would click the deploy button. Well, we need something, if we're going to run that in a kind of Dockerized environment, that we need something that's going to build that application. And so we basically took one part of that each. So Chris took the compute side of things, Nuno took the web app side of things, and for some reason I ended up working on the build service, which is something I had like no clue of how to do at all. But that's kind of the kind of project that I enjoy, is like just throwing myself in and trying to learn how to do it. And I have it on, I don't really go near that part of the code base anymore, but I have it on good authority that a lot of what I did still exists. So I'm pretty happy about that.
That's beautiful. I love that. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, you go.
You're the guest.
So that got us a long way, honestly. We made some really good headway into that, and then we started to kind of grow the team around it. So Mohammed then joined the kind of app team. Still, to this day, the team is broadly split into two. We're like one unit, but in terms of disciplines, we have what we call our app team, which are basically all full-stack web developers, Laravel developers. And then we have our infrastructure team, which is kind of a new discipline for us, something we haven't really had until we worked on cloud. And so we started to grow that team a little bit as well. So then we had Justin and Florian join the team. And we brought in David Hill. So he came in as kind of head of design, and he was very active in cloud to get us to basically to Laracon US, where we were going to announce cloud to the world. And then we brought in Jason Beggs as well, because we were very good team of backend engineers, but we were lacking some kind of, some of that front end stuff. And so Jason came in, and that was kind of, apologies if I've missed anybody off from that era of the project, but that was basically the team that got us to basically build out the proof of concept and have it ready to announce to the world at Laracon last year.
Okay. It's fun when we do have these different disciplines, and yet both Justin and Florian are full stack Laravel developers. They just happen to be very ops focused full stack Laravel developers, and all of y'all backend people are actually very capable front end people as well. But you're specialized more in the back end. And so it's just, I really appreciate, because I think a lot of companies think the best thing is to have entirely independent teams that don't know anything about what each other are doing. And I just watch the conflict that happens. And so my advice usually is try to avoid splitting those teams, But what y'all have done is found a way where you're like, we all could each do all of this, but it is not the best orientation of the way we work. And I'm like, I didn't realize it until you said this, but I'm like, that's kind of what we end up doing at Titan. It's like usually, we split the responsibilities and one person has a little bit more experience in one way or a little bit more, interest in one particular thing or something like that, even if, of course, they can do both. So it's fun hearing how a bunch of full stack capable Laravel developers still found those delineations and kind of structured themselves along those ways.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, honestly. Yeah, just different challenges that I've been used to. But it's, and you mentioned about the infrastructure guys, they are just all rock stars. They all incredibly good at infrastructure, but they could jump in the web app code base and actually just carry on working on it. And in fact, from time to time, we see the odd pull request that comes across because they don't want to wait for us to do it, so they just do it themselves.
Yep, totally makes sense. So you were doing build at the beginning, and so are you building Docker images for each deploy? Because I don't fully understand how Cloud actually does all of that, and what is the tooling you're using to build all that?
Yeah, so I guess I can walk you through a little bit of what happens under the hood when you click that deploy button. So
I would
from
love
the web
that.
app, if you click the deploy button in the UI, we basically pop a job onto a queue. We use SQS under the hood, so we pop a job onto the queue. And then we have a whole bunch of internal tooling built on top, basically built to orchestrate Kubernetes under the hood. So first thing that happens is that tooling will pick the job up off the queue, and it will grab and clone the customer's repository using a piece of software called BuildKit. Okay. And it will basically it will clone that down, and then it will CD into the correct directories and then run the customer's build commands that you can configure within the UI.
Yeah.
And then basically that will turn that into a Docker image, which we then store inside a Docker repository. And we put a job back on the queue to let the web app know that project has now been built. Okay. There's a theory why we did that, because we think that we might want to separate those two stages out one day from build and deployment. But right now, as soon as we've received the notification that build has been completed successfully, we drop another job on the queue to say, go ahead and deploy it. Okay. And then again, that internal tooling will pick up the job off the queue, and it will grab that image from ECR, and it will take all of the customer's settings in terms of how they want their application compute configured. And it will turn that into a custom resource for Kubernetes and apply that to the Kubernetes API and spin up that workload in the configuration that they want. That is magical. And I trash talk Kubernetes often because we still do
98%. And also like I'm sure you do, because you're practically using it and you're unhappy with it. And that is where my origin criticism came from. But I think it's an incredible tool. It's just 98% of people using it don't need it. And so it's really funny being like, no, this is what Kubernetes is for. These are the people who actually should be using Kubernetes. So it's really fun kind of learning about that system and have you had set up. That's really cool. So when did you make the transition away from, being in the code day to day to being like, oh, now I gotta be managing people and expectations and teams and everything? Was it a hard moment, or was it a gradual thing?
Yeah, I guess much like Jess's interview, there was a time when I think it was more or less at the same time, Jess was made team lead of the Nightwatch project. Yeah. James, team lead on core services. That's what we call like the Envoy, Forge, Vapor, that suite of products. And then I was made team lead of the cloud project. And I guess that, I don't remember exactly, but I guess that was probably a couple of months in that was sort of made official. And I still stayed in the code. I still am in the code, but just like it's becoming increasingly less that I'm in the code now. Yep. So up until Laracon, I was in a lot still, because we just had a whole bunch that we wanted to do. We still running relatively lean. In all honesty, we were pretty lean until February when we launched. But that served us really well, because we were able to move really, really quickly during that kind of just under a year period to get cloud from kind of 0 to 1. Yeah. So I guess relatively recently, towards the back end of last year, we started to actively grow the team. Mm-hmm. And obviously that meant things changed a little bit, because there was a lot of hiring to do. And I'm sure that hiring is pretty time consuming. Yeah. And then there's onboarding people and trying to figure out what the shape of that team should look like. And we've changed kind of workflows a little bit in between as well. So there was kind of a lot of logistical dancing to do. And I guess through that process, I've just got further away from the code. But I still really enjoy it. I still keep up to date with how things are structured. Still a lot of the decisions that I guess predominantly me and Nuno made at the very beginning are still intact today. There's obviously new patterns that need to be established from time to time. But it's still, like I said, for Vapor, Cloud is a very easy code base to get up and running on. Hopefully we've done a good job there.
I love it. I mean, from the outside, it looks like a good job. So,
Thanks.
All right. So 2 questions I had for you before we move on to just some of the one-off questions from other folks at Titan is, was there one thing that was unexpectedly hard in building Cloud? And was there one thing that was unexpectedly easy?
Oh, that's a great question. I wasn't expecting the second part of that. There was plenty of unexpectedly hard things. Maybe they were. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe they were expectedly hard. I think there's broadly 2 things which we were. Well, one of which we were very unsure how we were going to solve until very late in the whole build process, and that links into the other thing that I wanted to talk about. So I'll talk about the other thing first because it will lead into the expectedly hard problem. But billing has been something which is, I think we always knew was going to be challenging. But because we just have so many different things that we need to collect in order to charge people, it's incredibly complicated. And I got to shout out Dries here because Dries Vince has worked a lot on billing on his own. I've tried to step in at times to kind of help him out when things have been really busy, but for the most part, he's kind of taken that project and run with it himself. And we quite heavily use the event sourcing pattern for billing because, and it served us really well already, but basically because we have billing events that we need to collect on a regular basis from lots of different places, we can basically take those and dump them in an event store. And then we can use them to do with whatever we want. And so those events are like the raw data, which we then roll up over time and turn into,
actual
costs
statements
over time. So in itself, that was challenging because it's like a completely different code base to the web app itself. It's like it's a whole app in its own right. That was pretty challenging. But the single biggest problem with billing is it always comes so late in the day. And this is probably the one thing I didn't expect is you can't build billing until everything else is built that billing needs to collect things from. So it's like
very interesting.
Always the last part of the chain, always the last link in the chain to get built. And I'm sure you can imagine in the build up to launch, there was a lot of moving parts that needed to come together to get everything ready. And so billing was the last piece of the puzzle to really get done. But I think it's worked fantastically well for us. If there's ever been an occasion where we've collected data and then rolled it up in one way, but we actually decide we need to roll it up in a different way because we have this event store, we can basically just replay those events and do whatever we want with them. And that's happened a couple of times and been really, really useful.
That's very cool.
So billing, I think we always knew it would be challenging, but it's probably more challenging than we thought it would be. And part of that is because of the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that was bandwidth monitoring. Like, it's an incredibly complicated challenge to understand what every single app within a Kubernetes cluster is using, where that bandwidth is going, where if it's coming in or out or whatever. It's just a complicated problem. And we spoke to tens of vendors to try and solve this problem for us because we really didn't want to have to build our own thing. And this is kind of why it went as far down the road as it did. And we just hadn't solved this problem. And we're in December at this point, and we still know that this is something that we need to tackle, bearing in mind that we launched, end of February. We didn't have a huge amount of time to solve this problem. But another shout out for doing things like attending conferences is that we went to AWS reInvent in December in Vegas. And which, by the way, is an absolutely wild place. It's like 75,000 people over 3 days or whatever it is. I've never seen anything so large scale in my life.
I can imagine.
But I was there with Justin from the infrastructure team. And we just happened to stumble into a talk that was by somebody from Netflix. And it was basically talking about them solving not the exact same problem, but problem along the same lines. It basically sparked some ideas in Justin's head. And he then went away. I think he was probably hacking on it before he even left the hotel for the conference. But then he was working on it on the plane on the way home. And he basically wrote a proof of concept that actually allowed us to collect these bandwidth metrics that we needed.
Wow.
He was busy working on other stuff at the time, so he basically handed that over to Sylvester, who was another member of the team that joined not long after Laracon, actually, so sort of September time. And he was able to kind of take that and run with it and fully solve the problem. And it's been, it's been incredible to see that come to life.
I mean, it's funny because you say bandwidth monitoring. I'm like, I would have absolutely no idea how to do that. But I also wouldn't have known to look forward to it being an issue. And for those who don't know, if you get your cloud bill, it's not like here's your monthly cost. It is, here's your base monthly cost, which is a fixed number. And then here's 17 other things because you used an hour of this and you used 20 minutes of this and you used 24 days of this or whatever, which is totally reasonable. But I'm like, that is a lot to be maintaining for every single instance. And then, of course, rolling up to every single customer and rolling up to all these other things. So yeah, that's a lot. When you're doing the event sourcing, are you getting individual, 2 cent, 6 cent charges from AWS on a daily basis, and that's what you're aggregating?
It depends type answer, but it depends on where we're pulling that data from. So for instance, for bandwidth, we'll pull that from our own internal tooling because we're collecting that completely separately. And actually, I don't think to this point we pull anything directly from AWS because even for things like customers' compute running, that's abstracted a level away from AWS because it runs in Kubernetes. So we're basically having to track separately the hours of usage of each piece of, each part of their cluster that they're using. So no, and it depends as well because some services will allow us to pull that on an hourly basis, but others are only rolling up their own usage. So for instance, we partner with Cloudflare for R2 buckets, and their data, I think, is only available once a day. So that particular metric, we only go and grab once a day, whereas others we can do on a slightly more granular level. So it's a beast.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, but it is, like you said, this is a great case for event sourcing because you don't have to worry too much about, you just got to get the data in there and then you can project it out, in a way that makes sense when you need it. So,
and I've never been like team event sourcing. I always struggled to find something that I thought would be a good use case for it, but this was just like, breath of fresh air.
Too good. I love that. That's awesome. Well, I've done my thing where I'm running late and I have more questions. So I'm going to stop on my questions and I'm going to get to everybody else's questions. So one of the questions we had was, what is it like to build a safety mechanism on this large of a project to protect for things like customer spikes? Obviously, you have some level of spikes and ups and downs that you're expecting. But the idea that, let's say, one of your customers who, has a certain, level of predictability suddenly gets, I don't know what the dig effect is these days, but, some, Reddit or whatever, all of a sudden they're just kind of blowing up. What does predicting for something like that or preparing or protecting for something like that look like in an environment like cloud?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's not just viral traffic. Like we've already experienced DDoS attacks from...
I guess there's that too,
to customers' apps. So like that's another challenge that we have to have. And one of the decisions we made relatively early on was that we would partner with Cloudflare to do the networking side of things for us. So for those who don't know, all the traffic that comes into cloud will be routed through Cloudflare's network. And so they have some really good tooling around DDoS protection.
DDoS protection, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we're actually doing more work with them now to allow customers to kind of opt in to some of that stuff. So they will automate some DDoS protection, but we can also leverage things like rate limiting rules to allow customers to, I'm under attack, I want to, or I think I might be under attack, or there's, I'm expecting a spike in traffic over Christmas or whatever, and I want to make whatever that might be, we're going to allow them from the UI to be able to opt in to setting certain, rate limiting based rules to help with that. But from there on out, there's limited amounts that we can do. So we partner with Cloudflare to kind of take away that burden for us. But we just have to deal with a lot of scale to each of those individual Kubernetes clusters. And I think so far things have been going well from that respect.
All right. Got it. Okay, let's see. What else do we have? We had, what does the communication look like for pieces for your Laravel applications interacting with pieces that are outside of Laravel? Guillermo said, have they opted for gRPC for those pieces? And I don't even know enough about Cloud's architecture to know kind of like what we're talking about there. So I don't know if this is something where this is an easy answer for you, but are there a lot of communication, cross kind of systems communications that are happening where PHP has some kind of a layer of interaction with another system?
I don't know if the question is directed at customers' applications interfacing with other stuff. I think
he likely means yours, like the ways that Cloud is defining, communicating to things internally, not customers.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried to. So we've talked about the kind of split in the team between the app team and the infrastructure team. We all work together, but we've tried to kind of decouple those things as much as we possibly can. So all of the communication that I've talked about is mostly we put jobs on the queue and infrastructure will pick those jobs up off the queue. There are a couple of internal APIs that just standard like REST-based APIs where infrastructure can query an endpoint. And this is kind of for disaster recovery type scenarios. So if there's a real problem with the cluster and it goes away for whatever reason, that whole world can be rebuilt relatively quickly to make sure that customers' workloads aren't just going to disappear. But yeah, I think the short answer to that question is we've tried to keep those communication mediums to a minimum and basically just try to decouple those systems as much as we can to just rely on a couple of places where we actually have to communicate between the two.
I think queues are an appreciated means of communicating between systems. Are all the systems interacting with the queue all Laravel, or are there any of them in other different frameworks or languages?
No, the infrastructure side uses quite a bit of Go.
Okay.
So the whole web app is PHP and Laravel. The rest is, and the billing app is Laravel and PHP. And the rest is mostly Go based.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think we infrequently think of queue jobs and also other kind of key value stores and just kind of like data storage mediums as being actually a really effective way for sending messaging, because it's, you don't necessarily, doesn't have to be a push. It can just be we put it there and you pick it up whenever you want and you know what to do with it. There was a question about the consumer facing aspect here with the key value store. And I think he was asking kind of like, what's the background behind the key value store and then the MySQL that you guys built? Because I know Postgres was kind of the main thing. And I think Postgres is from an external vendor. I don't know anything, actually. This is fun. Normally, I've been saying this more often lately, but I'm like, normally I pretend like I don't know the answers to the questions. I actually have no idea. What's the story behind the key value store and the MySQL database that y'all are using?
Yeah, so you were right. Serverless Postgres is backed by Neon.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually, KV Store is backed by Upstash.
Okay, got it.
Those two products are backed by third-party vendors, but they are vendors that we did a lot of kind of calls, partnership-based calls with a lot of different companies, and these were two that were kind of standouts for us as partners who we thought would do a really good job for us and our customers. And so far, I think it's been that they've both been incredibly good.
Love it.
So I'm happy with the decisions that we made there. The MySQL offering is something that we are hand rolling. And there was a lot of back and forth. For the longest time, we were going to launch with serverless Postgres only. But we felt pretty strongly that MySQL is something that a lot of Laravel developers use, and we felt that we needed to come out with a MySQL offering. And we felt that we wanted to build our own implementation of it, for better or worse. I think it's just been something that we felt we wanted to have control of. And we wanted to build something that we can kind of build over time and make something that's a really kind of core foundation of Laravel Cloud. So that gets us how those came about. So two are kind of third-party offerings, and the last one is our own custom solution.
That's very cool. I wish I could have a whole podcast just asking about that MySQL setup, because I'm so curious. Let's see. I think that's probably the last one I'm going to allow through, because I know we need to start wrapping it up. So I do want to ask you that. Have you been involved in all in the custom MySQL build, or has it, since it's a little bit later in the game, has it been something where you're more distant?
Of actually very little to do with it. So Chris Fidelpa, who people may probably know him more commonly, kind of made the proof of concept of MySQL. And towards, I guess, probably post Laracon, he kind of broke some ground on that and made some progress on MySQL. And then a lot of the infra team have now been involved in kind of taking his proof of concept on. And then I think it's predominantly been Nuno who's worked on the web app side, the interface between the web app and the infrastructure side of MySQL, and probably a couple of the other app team as well. But I think predominantly Nuno has made most headway on that.
I gotta say, I've known Nuno since he was, basically a kid in the Laravel world. But over the last 6 months, I've seen him really step into his like kind of streamer persona. So it is. I just keep getting a reminder. I'm like, oh yeah, he's got a day job too. Every time you mention him coding, I'm like, yeah, I guess he actually codes too. Because I'm like, yeah, he's a DevRel guy. Sits on streams all day long. So
no, he's a machine.
Love it. I love it. That's a smart guy. Okay, so we now have officially hit our 45 minutes. So I want to wrap up by asking, is there anything that you wish we had talked about, any aspects of your journey or who you are or your time at Laravel, or anything else that you want to make sure we get a chance to talk about?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think I've really enjoyed it. Hopefully did a good job of... It's so much that we could talk about, like you said. It's hard to... Yep. Hopefully we got the important points out. But I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yes, we covered a lot and left a lot uncovered, which is my favorite way. We talked about this before we started recording. It's my favorite way to end a podcast because I'm like, I want to be so curious about you and what you do that I'm like, but there's so many more things to cover because that means it's a good conversation, and I am there. I'm proud of myself for noticing my timer, but I wish I wasn't there. So, well, Joe, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We will make sure that some of Joe's best contributions, including that Laracon talk with the reverb was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my entire life. So we will make sure. I know we didn't even talk about it, but we will make sure that some of Joe's kind of like coolest moments are posted in the show notes, so you all can kind of check it out and follow him and everything like that. And obviously, we're gonna have you back. I have so many more things I want to talk to you about. So look forward to.
I want to talk about the drone now.
Yeah,
I'd forgotten about the drone.
Well, let's talk about the drone for a second. Okay, so I know that you've been told this, but that was the most unexpected moment at a conference I've ever had. And then people have brought in mystery speakers and whatever. So can you, first of all, just kind of give the pitch of, what were you doing for people who didn't see it? And then, what's interesting to you about that? What's fun? What was fun about that?
It was more terrifying than fun, I think. I don't know. The Laracon talks have just been incredibly good, and the bar keeps getting higher and higher and higher.
Yeah.
And I had been asked by Taylor to give a talk, so I really wanted to do a good job, and I thought, I'd been working on Reverb, Reverb was fresh in my mind. It probably hadn't even been out that long at the time.
I don't think so.
So it's going to be a Reverb talk. That was always the premise, and I thought, what can I do that's a little bit different than building a chat app on the stage or something? So I just had this crazy idea. What if I could just buy a cheap drone, a drone that I could, a programmable drone, basically.
Yeah.
I thought, what if I could do that? And I found this $100 drone that was I think it was meant for teaching school kids or whatever. It's very cheap. It was very lightweight. It was ugly. The worst part about it was it's so small. I think it got drowned a little bit on the stage. But anyway, the whole premise of the talk was, what if I can control a drone via WebSockets powered by Laravel Reverb? And so I bought this drone, and I sat here one weekend, and I spent an hour just knocking up a proof of concept, and I got the drone to fly, and I was like, right, that's it. I have to do this now. So I pitched it to Taylor, and classic Taylor was like, oh yeah, pretty cool. And so I was like, all right, that's enough. That's a sign enough that I'll do this. So I did it, and I made the talk, and I was practicing and stuff at home in my kitchen area. And I would practice it, and sometimes it would fly, the drone would fly really well. And then other times it would just fly and just float off. It's not anything to do with my controls, but the sensors in the drone just weren't working well.
Huh.
And I figured out eventually, if I turned the kitchen lights on full, it was absolutely fine because it could detect the pattern on the floor and hover as it's supposed to. So that was the first sign of, I have no idea what the stage is going to be like. Is this even going to work when I get up on the stage? Then I wasn't sure if I was allowed to even fly with the drone, so I had to get it to the States, and I was a bit worried, well, what happens if it gets taken from me at border control?
Oh my God.
And so I'd had this whole video recorded, but I was like, it would be real shame if I had to bail at the end of the talk and
show the
play a video.
Version. Yeah.
So I got it there, that was all fine. They let it through customs fine, and then it got to the day before the conference, and it was the speakers' tech checks.
Mm-hmm.
And I had basically wanted to put the drone on a box on the stage and fly, so nobody knew what it was. Like, so the whole part of my talk was very technical. Nobody knew what was going to happen. I was going to walk on the stage and just put this box on the stage. So I wanted to test it during the tech check, and I think I was the very last person to go. And there was all these like rock stars from the Laravel community like on the stage, and this was going to be the first time that I tested this drone out on the stage, and like that was almost more terrifying than the room full of 900 people. But I took it. The lights were really good on the stage, so I took off, and I don't think anybody on the stage was expecting it to happen. And I got this round of applause from all of the speakers on the stage, and that was the
Nice.
moment where I thought, oh, this talk might go down well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, all of the stars essentially aligned, but it could have been a very different story where it kind of fell flat on my face a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I literally was sitting in the back at the Titan sponsor booth, texting my brothers being like, you will not believe what's happening at Laracon right now. And they're programmers, but they don't really care about Laravel stuff. But I was like, they are going to care about this because this is amazing. I love it. That was
fun.
Such a clever and fun idea, and also such a great demonstration of what WebSockets can do. Because, I gave a talk years ago about, hey, you can use your Laravel app to control lights in the background, right? And that's a single command sent over an API. I even think I was using if this then that to make it happen because there's no way to do it directly. And just the fact that I could interact with physical devices at all blew my mind. But the idea of using that kind of real-time communication, it just feels so outside of what we normally do. And I'm just praying for more. I know it's just a fun demonstration, but I'm just looking forward to the really cool thing that happens in the future that looks back at that talk as the reference of somebody being inspired saying, well, when I saw him with the drone, I knew I could whatever. So
that would be pretty wild. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun. I very fond memories of that once it was over.
As an audience member, I have very fond memories of that. So I can't imagine as the creator what it was like. So, well, thanks for bringing that up. We will link that video in the show notes. And yeah, man, it's just been such a good time having you here. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing so much with us. And I look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you for having me. Honestly, I think I said to you in the build up to this that this is like a bucket list thing for me. So I'm very grateful to have been invited. So thank you very much.
I appreciate your humility because I'm like, dude, Joe, you are a rock star. I need you to, but whatever. You know what? If this is what you got to do to stay humble, do what you got to do to stay humble. But in my mind, you're a rock star. So, well, thanks, Joe. And for the rest of you, thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.